Before the trees were tall, before the rivers ran deep, the war had already begun. Whispered saying among the ash veil shamans long before European boots touched the soil of the Amazon, long before ink-drawn borders named nations and rivers were measured in miles, the forest had its own empires, unseen, unheard, and almost entirely forgotten. These were not the empires of stone or bronze, but of vine and bone, blood and spirit. And at the very heart of it all was a war no one speaks of, the Forbidden War, a clash that echoed through the jungle canopy, burned into memory by ash, by scream, by silence. This is not a war you'll find in books. No records remain in any archive, no kingdom claims it, and no conqueror boasts its victory. It was erased, not by time, but by design. Yet in the hidden places of the Amazon, elders still speak its name in hushed tones, as if the very act of remembering might wake something buried. They called themselves the Thorned Ones, a confederation of forest clans whose power stretched across thousands of hidden miles. Not a single kingdom, but a woven alliance, held together by ancient pacts, blood brotherhoods, and spirit oaths sworn in moonlit groves. They didn't build cities, but they cultivated entire forest ecosystems like palaces. Trees bent to their songs, rivers shifted at their command, and jaguars walked beside their children. Opposing them were the Verdant Circle, an equally secretive order, healers, lore-keepers, and guardians of the sacred balance. While the Thorned Ones claimed dominion over the forest's outer body, vines, thorns, predators, the Verdant Circle protected its inner soul, the breath of life within each plant, the songs carried by the wind, the ancestral memory of rain. For generations, the two coexisted in tense harmony, each honoring an ancient pact of division, where neither side would intrude upon the domains of the other. One ruled the visible wild, the hunters, the warriors, the poisons. The other ruled the invisible, dreams, cures, spirits, and death rites. But then, a betrayal, one that changed everything. It began, as many forbidden wars do, with a single act of greed or desperation. Some say it was a thorned war chief who crossed the line, taking sacred roots from a verdant grove to create a new kind of weapon, a living toxin that could kill gods and twist spirits. Others claim it was the Verdant Circle who struck first, fearing the growing aggression of their neighbors, assassinating a thorn matriarch under the cover of eclipse. Whatever the truth, the pact was broken, and the forest, alive and ancient, remembered. The first battle was not fought with blades or fire, but with song. It happened in the Valley of Fractured Growth, where the roots themselves turned against the warriors who marched through. Vines wrapped around throats as if alive. Flowers emitted maddening spores. The dead did not stay dead, and yet both sides refused to retreat. This was not conquest. It was erased. The Thorned Ones unleashed beasts bred for nothing but war. Horned serpents with bark-like skin, panthers laced with venom, and warriors whose bodies were tattooed with burning sap that turned their blood to flame. The Verdant Circle responded not with steel, but with silence. They called upon old gods, faceless, root-bound things that had not stirred in 1,000 years. Their shamans carved runes into bark and skin, sacrificing memory itself to unleash forgotten rituals. Whole generations disappeared from time. Trees screamed. And yet, outside the forest, the world moved on. No one knew. No one dared to. Because the forest does not give up its dead, and it does not share its secrets. But still, deep beneath the canopy, the war went on. Not over territory, not even over belief, but over the right to shape what is sacred. And in time, something darker woke from beneath the earth, something neither side had planned for. A third force, not of the Thorned Ones, not of the Verdant Circle, something ancient, something forbidden. The forest does not forget. It buries, it waits, and then it returns. Carved into a fallen obelisk near the old redstone grove, survivors, scarred, abandoned, and poisoned by the war of their elders, gathered in secret. They were children of both bloodlines, half warrior, half dreamkeeper, and they rejected both. led by a girl who bore no name, only the title Ember Throat. The ash root rejected the ancient laws. They spoke to spirits, but wielded blades. They grew poison flowers not for war, but for communion. And they carried the truth that neither the Thorned nor the Verdant wanted to face, that the forest itself was turning against them all. The ash root did not fight for power. They fought for the soul of the jungle. Meanwhile, the war escalated. The Thorned ones summoned the Horned Choir, a battalion of war priests whose chants could cause trees to bleed and rivers to boil. These weren't just men, they were walking altars. Covered in moss-grown armor and living fungi, they marched through sacred soil, desecrating what the Verdant had sworn to protect. The Verdant Circle, pushed beyond even their ancient taboos, answered with the bloom of night, a plague grown from a forgotten orchid that whispered in dreams. Released into the mist, it devoured the senses of any who breathed it, turning warriors into maddened husks who danced as they died, vines sprouting from their mouths. The forest moaned, and somewhere beneath the ruined heartwood of the jungle, a pulse began to stir. It was felt first by the animals, the sudden migration of jaguars westward, birds flying in spirals, monkeys tearing their own eyes out. Then came the strange rains, not water, but a golden sap that melted flesh. And finally, the dreams, shared visions of a spiraling tree, black with rot, whose roots twisted not into the ground, but into bone. The Thorned ones believed it was an ancient weapon. The Verdant Circle believed it was a curse. But Ember Throat of the Ash Root saw it for what it was, a warning. Ember called for a meeting, a bloodless council, deep in the haunted ruins of Yakatlan Hollow, where even spirits whispered in fear. She sent a single emissary to both factions, carrying a branch carved with 3 runes. Remembrance, return, rupture. The message was simple. If we do not end this war, the forest will. The Thorned ones responded by burning the emissary alive and hanging the rune branch above their war gate. The Verdant Circle simply never replied. And so, the Ash Root did the unthinkable. They began to unweave the forest's memory itself. Using rituals forbidden since before the age of humans, they bled the roots of sacred trees, capturing echoes of the jungle's first breaths. They sang songs that made mountains shift. They opened wounds in the forest's skin. And they learned the oldest truth of all, that the forest was not a place. It was a being, and it was dying. You think the forest is quiet? That is because you do not speak its language. The screaming never stopped. Last words of Rootwalker Vika long before steel, before fire, before the greed of distant kingdoms, the forest had grown in silence, but it was never still. Every leaf carried a memory. Every root hid a secret. And now, the forest began to scream. It began at the edges, where the outer vines met the sky. Birds dropped dead from branches without wounds. Rivers turned black with fungal clouds. Trees bent backward, cracking under invisible weight. The war, once fought by tribes, had infected the forest's soul. The line between enemy and ally blurred. Now, it was the land itself that fought back. The Thorned ones, proud masters of beast and blade, suddenly found their creatures turning on them. Panthers once loyal since birth vanished. Snakes refused command. The poison flowers stopped blooming or bloomed in the wrong places, where warriors slept. The Verdant Circle fared no better. Their sacred groves withered overnight. Ritual sites grew silent. Spirits that once answered chants now screamed, or laughed, or vanished. The healers' herbs grew bitter. Their visions turned blind. They began to understand. This was not war. This was a collapse. And then came the Howlers. No one knew where they came from. Some said they were forest spirits driven mad by the unbalanced war. Others whispered they were ancestors returned to punish the living. They were humanoid, but twisted, bark flesh stretched over bone, thorn joints bent backward, mouths like split-seed pods. They didn't speak. They only howled, a long, layered sound that drove warriors mad before it killed them. They arrived in swarms. Whole thorn hunting parties were shredded in seconds. Verdant oracles plucked out their own eyes to stop seeing the visions that followed their cries. Even the ash root, despite their deep communion with the jungle, were hunted. Yet they alone began to see a pattern. The howlers were drawn to memory, places where ancient blood had spilled, where songs had been sung, where trees had been made to forget. The ash root realized a deeper horror. The war wasn't just destroying the forest. It was awakening something that had been deliberately buried. A force older than either faction. A consciousness sleeping beneath the soil. The memory below. The memory below wasn't a being in the usual sense. It had no form. It did not speak. It had no desire for revenge, no will for justice. It was remembrance itself, the raw, unfiltered soul of everything the forest had ever been. In ancient times, the first forest keepers had sealed it away, not out of fear, but necessity. For even the jungle, as wild as it was, could not hold the full weight of its own past. Now, war has fractured the seals. Now, memory has leaked. And as memory leaked, it took form. Ash trees began to grow upside down, their roots clawing toward the sky. Animals were born already dead, walking with eyes made of black sap. Rain began to fall in reverse. And deeper still, the howlers multiplied. Desperate, the Thorned Ones prepared their final weapon, the iron vine. It was a curse forge, a fusion of rootcraft and bloodcraft, once banned by the old clans. Using the life force of prisoners, verdant, ash root, even their own dissenters, they bred a living siege tree whose tendrils could pierce through any magic, any spirit barrier, and drink the soul of the forest itself. The verdant circle, in secret, prepared their last rite, the green silence. It was a death song so powerful it would unmake entire miles of forest, silencing all life, so that rebirth might be. To give up your name is to give up your place in the memory of the forest. But some wounds can only be healed by forgetting. Saying among the ash root as the Thorned Ones marched their iron vine into the western jungle, and the verdant circle gathered to sing the green silence, the ash root prepared something older than both, a rite of erasure. Led by Ember Throat, they gathered at a circle of stone monoliths etched with vines, the 12 witnesses, ancient totems that predated even the thorned myths. Here, the forest's oldest spirits were said to reside, bound in silence, watching the rise and fall of every war, every peace, every betrayal. Ember called upon these spirits not with chants or blood, but with names. She spoke the names of all those lost, thorned, verdant, rootless. One by one, even those the forest had tried to forget, even those whose deeds were too dark to be remembered. And then, she did the unthinkable. She gave up her own name. In ash root tradition, your name was your anchor to memory. Without it, you became unbound, not dead, not gone, but unwritten. You could no longer be found in visions, no longer remembered in chants. You ceased to echo in the forest's soul. When Ember gave up her name, the spirits stirred. The vines on the witness stones began to move, bleeding sap like tears. The wind blew backward. The sky turned green. The sacrifice was accepted, and the ritual began. Far from the ritual circle, chaos reigned. The iron vine rooted itself into the sacred heart of the forest, Kiara's crown, a towering canopy older than the stars. Its roots spread like disease, turning bark into bone, sucking the memory from the trees. Even time began to fracture. Warriors found themselves aging between heartbeats or stuck in moments that never ended. In response, the verdant circle began their song, the green silence. Their voices did not rise. They fell, deeper and deeper into frequencies no human throat could find. As they sang, the light dimmed. Leaves blackened. Even the air grew still. The two catastrophes moved toward each other. Life-eating vine and soul-killing song. All would be devoured, unless the ash root's rite succeeded. The sacrifice of names was not a ritual of war or healing. It was one of memory severance, cutting the forest free from the past that had begun to rot its core. If completed, it would erase the forbidden war from the living mind of the jungle. Not just the events, but the very soul memories of those involved. It would come at a cost. Those who gave up their names would vanish from all remembrance. Their songs would stop. Their faces would never be painted again. Not even the wind would speak of them. But in doing so, the forest could heal. Ember, now nameless, walked into the center of the witness stones, her body covered in ash, thorns, and black paint. Around her, 13 ash-root warriors did the same, one from each bloodline, each giving up their names, their ancestry, their stories. And as they chanted, the witness stones cracked. Memory bled into the sky. Elsewhere, the thorned ones suddenly halted, their rage fading. They could no longer remember why they were killing. The verdant singers fell silent mid-chant, their visions collapsing, their cause unraveling. Across the forest, the howlers paused, then screamed once more. Then were gone. The iron vine withered. The green silence faded. And for the first time in 1,000 heartbeats, the forest exhaled. But those who had sacrificed, they were no longer there. Not dead, not lost, simply unremembered. The ash root vanished from history, their villages overgrown, their paths erased, their stories turned to wind and dust. Only the faintest echo remained, in the way a vine might bend, in a whisper between branches, in a sudden feeling of sorrow where none should be. The forbidden war had ended, but no one remembered how, only that it must never happen again. There is no peace without forgetting. There is no forgetting without loss. Verdant proverb, source unknown. The war was over. Or so the forest believed. The skies cleared. The rivers flowed straight once more. Flowers bloomed in abandoned places, and animals returned to paths long choked by war. The thorned ones, fragmented and leaderless, returned to their far-flung jungle holds. The verdant circle, weakened and visionless, retreated into deeper groves, their oracles quiet, their tomes closed. Yet in truth, this was not peace. It was absent. The memory of the war had been stripped from the forest's roots, and with it, the memory of the ash-root sacrifice. Those who had given everything had become nothing, nameless ghosts moving through wind and root. The balance had returned, but it was hollow. And beneath that balance, something stirred still. Not all had forgotten. There were those few, very few, who had not been present when the sacrifice of names took place. They had wandered too far, been too deep in vision trance, or simply held names so new or so old that the right could not reach them. These survivors, scattered and confused, began noticing things. Trees that bent toward forgotten trails. Stones etched with symbols no one could translate. Dreams of 13 warriors with no faces, standing in a circle of vines. They did not remember the war, but they remembered that they had forgotten something. One such survivor was a child, born with no clan markings, no ancestral chants, no place. Found alone, wrapped in a cloak of ash. She was taken in by a small verdant sect named Lyra and raised as a healer. But as she grew, she began to see what others could not. She heard voices in the leaves. She bled sap when wounded, and she dreamed of fire, thorn, and silence. She began to ask questions that made the elders afraid. In a hidden thorned enclave far to the south, a similar tale unfolded. A former bee singer named Carowin began carving figures he had never seen before, warriors in cloaks of root and flame, their faces blank, their eyes glowing. His hands moved without thought. His chants faltered. When he tried to remember where he learned these images, he found only a wall of silence. The verdant called it echo sickness. The thorned called it shadow hunger. But it was neither. It was a remembrance trying to return. The sacrifice of names had suppressed the forest's memory, but it had not destroyed it. Like roots under stone, it waited, quiet, persistent, growing in the dark. One night, Lyra followed a vision deep into the forbidden forest, past broken monoliths and trees that wept blood. There she found the ruins of Yakatlan Hollow, half buried in vines, its stones cracked and pulsing faintly with forgotten breath. In the center lay a branch, old, dry, carved with 3 runes. Remembrance returned rupture as she touched it, the sky darkened. The wind whispered in 13 voices, and something ancient looked back at her. The forbidden war had not ended. It had merely been delayed. The forest had forgotten to protect itself, and now, that forgetting has left it vulnerable. For there was another power, older than Thorn or Verdant or Ash, that had slept through the war, hidden in the bone rivers below. It had not been awoken by rage, or greed, or balance, but by silence. And it was coming. The forest was never alone. Beneath its roots, something else waited, not in darkness, but in memory. Fragment from a broken ash root tablet. Untranslated, the surface had forgotten, but the depths had not. Far beneath the canopy, beyond the roots of the tallest trees and the bones of the oldest spirits, ran a hidden world, the bone rivers. These were not rivers in the usual sense. No water flowed here. Instead, they were living tunnels of calcified roots, memory fossils, and the discarded skeletons of every dream the forest had ever tried to bury. And something lived within them. It was called many names in half-remembered chants. The crawling remnant, the thirsting god shoe grows in reverse, but all agreed on one thing. It had never walked under sun or moon. It was not born. It was remembered as being the forest's ancient shame, shaped from the pain too deep for spirit songs and too vast for roots to hold. When the sacrifice of names was completed and the war erased, it had stirred in confusion. For thousands of years, it had fed silently on grief, on memory. Now, with memory stripped, it grew hungry. And when Lyra touched the forgotten rune branch, the veil cracked. The bone rivers opened. Lyra, now changed by her vision, began walking through the forest like one in trance. Her eyes turned black. Vines shifted around her feet, whispering in languages none had spoken for centuries. Animals followed her. Rain avoided her. She was becoming a conduit, not for the forest's power, but for its forgotten guilt. At the same time, Carowin of the Thorned Ones was drawn by dreams to the southern edge of the forest, where dry roots hummed with hollow breath. There, he found a pit, perfectly round, lined with bone, and so deep that no echo ever returned. He knelt, and in that silence, he heard a voice not with his ears, but with his blood. "You buried me in your forgetting. I will rise in your memory." The crawling remnant had begun its return. As fissures opened in the jungle, the verdant circle began sensing the shift. Oracles wept without cause. Plants flowered out of season. The dead refused to decay. In secret, a small circle of elder verdants began to search their sealed texts, scrolls so old they were written in root thread, not ink. There, buried beneath warnings and prophecies, they found mention of a ritual never completed, the 13th binding. A final rite that could anchor the forest's memory forever, sealing not just pain, but the ability to recall pain. A ritual feared even by the founders of the circle, for it did not merely suppress memory. It destroyed the possibility of ever learning from it again. But it had a price. It required a living sacrifice from each of the three bloodlines, Thorned, Verdant, and Ashroot. The Verdants had themselves. The Thorned could be persuaded. But the Ashroot was gone, weren't they? And so, the hunt began, not for power, but for a name. One name. The last name. The only name the forest had not truly erased. Lyra. She was no longer just a girl. She was the ember that refused to die. The forest had tried to forget, but she remembered. And in doing so, she had become the final threat, or the final hope. She does not carry the name. She is the name. Whispered by the vines of Yakatlan Hollow, the jungle had gone still again, but not with peace. It was the stillness before a storm, the hush of an old world holding its breath. And in the center of it all walked Lyra, or rather, what Lyra had become. Her feet did not bruise the moss. Her voice called no echo. Even the oldest trees leaned away as she passed, because they remembered now. Not everything, but enough. The Thorned Ones saw her in their war visions, a girl wrapped in ashlight, with 13 shadows at her back. The verdant circle saw her in their trance smoke, her hands dripping sap and fire. And in the bone rivers below, the crawling remnant knew her by scent, the last unburied name. The forest had tried to forget her, and failed. Lyra did not walk alone. Carowin, guided by dreams and carved visions, followed her path without question. Though thorned by blood, he no longer sang the songs of conquest. His arms bore ash spiral scars that he did not remember making. When he looked at her, He saw not a girl, but a convergence, the meeting point of everything broken. He asked her nothing. He simply followed. From the western groves, an aged verdant seer named Sela the Pale joined them. Once silenced by rogue spirits, she had gone blind years before. Yet when Lyra came near, her eyes wept green tears, and she saw again, but only the past. The war, the ash-root circle, the sacrifice, the silence. She wept for 3 days, then rose and walked. Together, they became the forest's answer to its own crime. Thorned, verdant, and ash, walking side by side, uninvited by their clans, unwelcomed by the old powers. The forest bent before them. Birdsong ceased. No trail resisted their step. And in the deepest glade, where light dared not settle, the three stood before the breathless grove, the heart of all root memory. A place sealed during the sacrifice of names. Here, the forest's oldest voice lay dreaming. The 13th binding had to be performed here. But there was no guide, no scroll, no song, because the forest had never expected anyone to survive remembering. The ground trembled. The crawling remnant had begun its ascent. From the bone rivers came tendrils of thought, not flesh, memories twisted into claws, dreams turned to spines. All who dreamed now saw it. A vast mouth not made of teeth, but of whispers. A body of coiled memory, rising not through earth, but through guilt. It didn't seek to conquer. It sought to overwrite, to turn the forest into itself. A place with no future, only a spiral of endless return. Pain without healing, memory without meaning. The forest had two choices now: bind itself in forgetting, destroying all paths of growth, sealing the wound forever, or remember everything, including the pain, and face the crawling remnant as one. Lyra chose the second. Standing between two ancestors and beneath a canopy of ghosts, she opened her mouth and spoke not with words, but with names, names not remembered but felt. She spoke the names of trees that had never bloomed again, the names of warriors who died with nothing but sky in their mouths, the names of spirits buried in silence. She spoke until her voice broke, and then her blood began to speak. From her skin rose glowing symbols, not thorned, not verdant, not ash, but something older, something whole. And the forest listened. We carved our stories into bark, thinking bark would never burn. Fragment from the Verdant Codex, Leaf 9, Line 3. The forest is not a passive place. It watches. It waits. It records. For centuries, it had hidden its own trauma beneath the root and canopy, smothering memory like vines over a corpse. But now, with Lyra's name sung in bloodlight, with Carowin's silent loyalty, with Sela's vision of truth, the forest began to remember. And what it remembered first was fire. It came not from the sky, nor from flint, but from deep within the trees themselves. Sap ignited. Branches cracked not with rot, but with rage. Trees that had stood for 1,000 years wept flame instead of water. Flowers bloomed in crimson. Vines pulsed like veins. But the fire did not spread outward. It burned inward. Inward toward the memory that had been sealed. Inward toward the breathless grove, where the first tree had dreamed, where the crawling remnant now rose like a tide of forgotten sorrow. There was no forest fire. This was a remembrance blaze, a cleansing not of land, but of soul. Lyra stood at the center, her body now a living root of the forest's will. Her skin was bark, her veins sap. Her breath carried pollen that shimmered in sacred shapes. She did not scream as the memory flames circled her. She sang. And with every note, pieces of the ash root returned. A mask drifting on the wind. A name etched in light. A single war drum, beating slowly beneath the soil. Carowin, eyes closed, stepped forward and plunged his thorned blade into the roots beneath Lyra. It did not kill. It unlocked. The blade had been forged in betrayal centuries ago. Now, it served remembrance. From the wound in the earth, green gold mist rose, memory gas, heavy with spirits. And Sela, aged and shaking, took the last step. She placed her hand on Lyra's back and chanted the opening words of the 13th binding. words that had never before been spoken aloud. Let the wound be opened. Let the wound be seen. Let the wound be healed. Not by silence, but in truth. The crawling remnant arrived. It did not roar. It did not strike. It echoed. Everything it was, every pain, every betrayal, every fear the forest had buried, poured forward in a tide of voice and vision. Spirits warped by grief. Trees twisted by forgotten crimes. Beasts born of guilt. It surged toward the grove, and Lyra stepped into its path. She was no longer merely Lyra. She was all that had been denied, all that had been sacrificed and erased. And as the remnant enveloped her, she did not resist. She welcomed it. And in that embrace, the forest did something it had never done before. It forgave itself, not by forgetting, not by silencing, but by finally holding its past without breaking. The crawling remnant screamed, and then it broke, shattered into wind, into seed, into rain. The bone rivers cracked and bled light. The grove exhaled. The fire faded, and the forest, for the first time in 1,000 years, was whole. But when the mist cleared, Lyra was gone. Not burned, not buried. Planted, where she had stood, now grew a tree of no known kind, with bark like skin and leaves shaped like names. It did not speak. It simply stood, remembering. She grew where silence had lived. And in her silence, we heard the names again. Old forests saying, origin untraceable, the war had ended. Not in victory, not in surrender, but in memory. And from that memory, a single tree stood where Lyra once breathed. A tree not of thorn, nor verdant, nor ash root, but something beyond blood and banner. Its bark shimmered with shifting glyphs. Its roots drank not water, but story. And its leaves, soft, luminous, fragile, whispered names with every breath of wind. Some who heard it wept. Others fled. Most simply listened, and forgot what silence used to feel like. The verdant circle, shattered and reduced, gathered again beneath this tree, not as keepers of secrets, but as learners. The eldest among them declared, we no longer preserve the forest. We are preserved by it. They rewrote their chants. They unsealed their vaults. And in their new order, no name was forbidden. The thorned ones, once scattered by fire and defeat, sent their fiercest war mothers to kneel before the singing tree. For the first time, they painted not their own ancestors, but the unknown ones, faces half remembered, half invented, echoing the ash root whom they no longer claimed to have forgotten. And then came the children. From forgotten corners of the jungle, from shattered clans, from root paths only animals used, they arrived. Silent, watching, drawn not by teaching or law, but by instinct. They played beneath the singing tree, and the tree bent toward them. Some said the tree taught them directly, not in language, but in sensation. Others said they simply knew things they should not know. How to speak to wind, how to call snakes without fear, how to listen to stones. They were called the seed-born, not of any lineage, but of the forest's rebirth itself. And among them, the name Lyra became something more than legend. It became a season. When her name filled the air, the forest bloomed differently. Rain fell slower. Spirits danced openly. And for a brief time, every wound in the canopy seemed to glow, not with pain, but with memory healed. Carowin returned once more, old and hollow-eyed, to the site of the tree. He had not spoken since the final ritual. He had carved no figures, chanted no songs. He placed his war mask at the base of the trunk, then lay down beside it and did not rise again. The tree grew a single new root to cradle his body. And in the wind that night, a new name was whispered, Carowin the Silent Witness. As decades passed, the forest changed. No longer divided by pact or blade, it moved as one organism. Its clans were no longer thorned or verdant or rooted. They were all simply called keepers. Keepers of memory, keepers of pain, keepers of healing. They taught that peace was not the absence of war, but the presence of truth, and that forgetting might soothe a wound, but only remembrance could make it whole. At the edge of the forest, beyond where roots end and horizon begins, there now stands a single vine-covered marker. It bears no name, no symbol, just a single phrase carved into wood that never rots. She remembered. And so, we remained. The past does not end. It circles. It waits. It tests us not by memory, but by what we do when memory returns. Root Song teaching, recited during the day of returning though the war had long ended. The forest did not forget what forgetting had cost. And so, once each cycle, during the season of still leaves when the jungle holds its breath and even predators pause, the keepers perform a rite unlike any other. It is not a celebration. It is not a mourning. It is called the turning, a day when no tools are lifted, no chants are sung, and no fire is lit. A day when the forest is listened to, not spoken over. The people walk barefoot, their faces unpainted. They sit beside roots and listen for stories, not from elders, but from the ground itself. Because deep beneath the soil, the echoes still stir. Not all memories healed cleanly. In some parts of the forest, wound trees still grow, warped trunks twisted like bones, whose sap runs black when cut. No one knows what dreams are in them. Some believe they hold pieces of the crawling remnant, sealed inside by the 13th binding. Others claim they are scars, sacred and untouchable, proof that healing does not erase the mark of pain. The keepers do not fear these trees. They teach the young to approach, bow, and walk away, honoring the wound without trying to solve it. Because not all things should be solved. Some should simply be carried. And yet, the forest is not a place of sorrow. In the wake of the war, life bloomed richer than ever. Rivers once cursed ran clear. Trees forgotten by even the oldest spirits bore fruit again. Creatures that had vanished in the war's heat reappeared, not as beasts of burden or battle, but companions, symbols of the restored pact. The singing tree, grown from Lyra's last breath, stood at the center of it all, not as a god, not as an altar, but as a witness. A living archive of everything the forest had survived. Children climbed its lower limbs. Birds nested in its crown. Elders traced the moving glyphs across its bark and murmured names only they remembered. And when the wind was right, the tree whispered not in human tongue, but in pure feeling. A wave of warmth, grief, joy, terror, unfiltered and ancient. One day, during the turning, a child named Kelly, too young to know war, too bold to fear sacred places, wandered alone into the grove. She pressed her hand to the singing tree and asked aloud, "What did it feel like to be forgotten?" And the forest answered, not with sound, not with vision, but with presence. Kelly sat silently for hours, tears streaking her face though she did not understand why. When her parents found her, she said nothing, only took their hands and whispered, "We remember her now." And all around them, the leaves shivered in agreement. The crawling remnant did not return, but its shadow would never truly vanish. It lived in the caution of rituals, in the reverence shown to old scars, in the refusal to speak with certainty about the forest's will. And that was enough, because the forest no longer feared its past. It had woven it into its present. All roots drink the same earth. All bones return to it. Inscription found etched into a fallen war mask beneath the singing tree years past. Then decades. The jungle shifted again, not in chaos, but in renewal. Far beneath the surface, where the dead of all clans lay buried, thorned, verdant, ash root, the unnamed, something unexpected began to happen. From the ancient grave pits, flowers began to bloom. Not jungle flowers, not anything known to keepers, lore carvers, or vine herbalists. These blossoms grew in silence and glowed with faint inner light. Pale, blue-white petals shaped like open hands. The elders were summoned. The singing tree bent its highest limb, and all agreed. This was not rot, nor curse, nor random growth. It was a memory taking form. The keepers named them bone blooms. Each bloom was tethered to a buried soul, and not just warriors. Some grew above healers, betrayers, runaways, spirit talkers, even the forgotten ash root who'd been denied ritual. And when crushed, gently, in ceremony, each bloom released a scent unlike anything known. Not perfume, not decay, but emotion, One bloom evoked pride so strong it brought tears. Another caused intense sorrow, though no one knew whose it was. Some created silence, so deep the forest stilled around it. In time, the bone bloom fields became sacred. Not guarded, guided. New keepers were trained to walk among them, barefoot and blindfolded, learning to read memory by scent and spirit. These became the bloom seers, forest oracles, chosen not by bloodline or lineage, but by the blooms themselves. The blossoms opened only for those the earth deemed ready. The first bloom seer was Kelly, the child who had once asked the singing tree what it felt like to be forgotten. She walked the bone bloom fields every turning, leaving no trail but always returning with new songs. She never claimed visions. She never claimed power, only stories. And then came the day when a bloom did something new. It spoke, not aloud, not in words, but in pure memory, injected directly into the minds of all within reach. It was the memory of a girl, painted in red and white, standing in a ring of thorns, arms wide, eyes defiant, chanting a name she'd sworn never to forget. Lyra. But the memory was not hers. It was someone else's. Carowin's. The bloom had grown above his grave, and it had kept not just his bones, but his last thought. The jungle changed again. The keepers realized that their ancestors had not vanished. They had become soil, and that soil now spoke. Each bloom a whisper. Each scent is a lesson. Each field a chorus of the unburied past. No longer did the clans hide their shame. No longer did they divide history into heroes and betrayers. All had bled. All had burned. All had survived. And above it all, the singing tree stood quiet. For the first time in a generation, it stopped whispering names. Because now, the forest no longer needed reminding. Now, it remembered itself. We did not win. We did not lose. We became something else. Final entry from the Rootkeeper Scrolls: there is no monument in the forest. No stone tower. No statue of the fallen. But when the wind turns just right, and the mist rises over the deeper rivers, something strange occurs in the heart of the old war grounds. A shape appears, not built, not summoned, but formed by the trees themselves. Curved trunks bent together into arches. Vines looping with geometric precision. Orchids blooming only in the shape of eyes and hands. They call it the Ghost Shrine, though no one prays there. No chants, no drums, no offerings, just silence and memory. Because the Forbidden War was not a tale of glory. It was a tale of what happens when we forget who we are, when pact turns to pride, and growth turns to hunger. The Ghost Shrine is walked barefoot. Each child of the forest is brought there once, when they reach the age of knowing. They are shown the twisted tree roots still blackened from ancient fire. The bone fragments, untouched by scavengers, glowing faintly under moonlight. The scar lines where no moss ever regrows. And then they are told, this is what happens when we try to own what we are meant to share. Not a threat, a reminder. The forest's laws are not carved in stone, they're written in wounds. What happened to the crawling remnant? Some say it sleeps beneath the ash root caves, kept quiet by the old bindings. Others believe it was never truly destroyed, just changed, its hunger absorbed into the roots of the jungle itself. There are stories of strange plants growing near old battlegrounds, vines that twitch when no wind blows, orchids that hum like insects, trees that bleed white. But the keepers do not fear them. They tend them. Because every part of the forest, even the remnants of corruption, must be acknowledged, understood, and given a place. That is the only way the pact remains unbroken. In the time since the war, the clans have changed. No longer do they war over canopy paths or sacred waters. No longer do they mark their borders with thorn fences and blood glyphs. Instead, they share a single symbol, carved into tree bark, woven into clothes, painted on the foreheads of children during festivals. A vine twisted into a loop, pierced by a thorn, and flowering at the tip. It has no name, but all who see it understand. This is what we are. Wound, root, bloom. Memory, pact, flame. Forest, tribe, self. And still the singing tree grows. Its bark now stretches with new glyphs, ones no keeper remembers carving. Its roots pulse with strange, quiet life. Some say it's growing a seed, something meant for the future should another forgetting ever come. Others believe the seed is already among the people, perhaps a child, perhaps a song, perhaps a single bloom waiting for the right hands. There is no ending to the forest, only turning, only remembering, only listening. To forget is to cut the vine. To remember is to bloom again. Saying of the bloom seers, the forest has no calendar, no years carved in stone, no centuries wrapped in scrolls. It remembers time and seeds. Each bloom is a life once lived. Each thorn, a choice once made. Each root, a path once walked, in light or shadow. The forbidden war, in the end, was not forbidden because it was lost. It was forbidden because it nearly unmade the forest's memory. But now, the clans do not fear remembering. They teach it. In the northern riverlands, a child kneels by a gnarled tree, listening to the bark with one ear pressed close. She hums a song no one taught her. In the southern canopies, a young bloom seer touches a pale flower and weeps, not knowing why. Only that someone loved deeply once and lost. In the central glade, beneath moonlight, 5 elders of once rival clans sit in a circle. They burn no incense. They speak no words. They simply breathe, together. And overhead, the canopy breathes back. The jungle is not peaceful. It is not war. It is balanced, won again and again, not by dominance, but by sacrifice. What the Thorn clan did, what the Verdant abandoned, what the Ash root unleashed, what the forest endured, none of it is erased. None of it should be, because only by walking through the fire of their own history did the tribes become more than survivors. They became rooted, not in power, not in fear, but in shared truth. So when a child one day asks, "What was the forbidden war?" the keeper will not tell of victories, nor list the names of generals or betrayals. She will gather a bloom. She will press it to the child's chest and say, "Feel this. This is where it still lives. Not in the story, not in fear, but in you." The forest needs no ending. It only needs one thing: that we remember, that we root, that we bloom, again and again and again.